The map of American political power isn't just shifting this week, it is being aggressively erased and redrawn.
It really is.
Welcome to the deep dive. Every week, we take a massive stack of research and news, and we pull out the exact mechanisms you need to understand how the world is changing.
Right.
And today, we're unpacking a historic collision between a physical earthquake, which is millions of Americans packing moving boxes, and a legal earthquake triggered by a landmark Supreme Court decision handed down yesterday.
Yeah, and before we get into the weeds here, we need to set the ground rules right up front.
Mandatory disclaimer time.
Exactly. The source is driving our deep dive today, so data from the Brennan Center, the American Redistricting Project, analysis from Real Clear Politics, Democracy Docket, and the Seattle Medium, they contain incredibly intense, politically charged material.
Absolutely.
You are going to hear arguments from the left, from the right, and obviously from the highest court in the land. And we are not taking any sides.
Not at all.
Our mission is strictly impartial. We just want to break down the mechanics, the data, and the legal arguments so you can understand this historic board reset without the political spin.
We are just the guides to the source material. So let's start with the physical earthquake, the Great Migration of the 2020s.
Right, because before we even touch the law, we have to look at the math.
Exactly. The numbers from the Brennan Center and the American Redistricting Project, they paint a pretty stark picture of a country that's, well, tilting on its axis.
It's massive.
Since 2020, the American South has accounted for nearly 80% of all population gains in the United States. 80%.
The sheer volume of that movement is staggering.
Okay.
People are actively voting with their feet.
Yeah.
And because the United States allocates its federal political power based strictly on population encounter, a process called reapportionment, this physical movement of human beings translates directly into hard political muscle.
Okay, let's quickly define reapportionment for anyone who needs a refresher, just so we're all on the same page.
Sure.
Think of the U.S. House of Representatives as a pie cut into exactly 435 slices. That total number never changes.
Right, it's capped.
So every 10 years, based on the census, those slices are redistributed. If one state's population booms, they basically take a slice away from a state whose population shrank.
And looking at the 2030 forecasts, we're seeing a massive transfer of those slices.
Huge. Texas and Florida are projected to gain 4 seats each. 4.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, California is looking at a massive drop. They could potentially lose 3 to 5 seats. New York could lose up to 3, and Illinois up to 2.
The regional story is just unmistakable here. The Northeast, the Midwest, and the West Coast are experiencing accelerating population losses.
Right.
By the time we hit 2030, the South will be the most populous region in the country by a wide margin. It'll hold nearly 4 in 10 Americans.
Oh, okay, let's unpack this, because I think the immediate reaction for anyone looking at these statistics is to assume a direct partisan outcome.
Oh, for sure.
Right. Like, red states like Texas and Florida are gaining a ton of seats. Blue states like California and New York are bleeding them.
Yep.
So the surface level math suggests this is an automatic, guaranteed windfall for the Republican Party. But looking at the analysis from Real Clear Politics, that assumption feels fundamentally flawed.
It is flawed. And this is a classic example of why we have to look past the top-line numbers.
Right.
It's incredibly tempting to assume that a new congressional seat in a conservative state automatically equals a new conservative member of Congress.
Which makes intuitive sense, but
you have to analyze the actual human beings who are filling those moving boxes.
Yeah.
The data indicates that the voters migrating out of California and into places like Texas are disproportionately Republican.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So it's like an active political sorting mechanism. The people leaving are the ones who are most dissatisfied with the political climate of their home state.
Exactly. And the ripple effects of that sorting are super counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, by draining conservative voters out of California, the state actually concentrates its remaining Democratic base.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That makes California bluer overall, which could ironically protect several highly competitive Democratic seats in that state from flipping.
Interesting.
Simultaneously, those departing conservative voters push their new home states, like Texas or Florida, even further to the right.
Let me push back on that a bit, though. Even if California gets bluer, they are still losing the physical seats.
That's true.
But your point is that the new seats popping up in other states don't necessarily behave predictably.
That is a crucial nuance. Just look at recent history. Following the 2020 census, Oregon gained a congressional seat due to population growth.
And Oregon is a solidly blue state.
Right. But the way the new district lines were drawn created a highly competitive environment. In 2022, a Republican actually captured that brand new seat.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, it flipped back to a Democrat in 2024, but only by a razor-thin margin.
Which perfectly bridges us to the core of this entire deep dive. Demographics, the millions of people shifting across state lines, they only dictate how many seats a state gets.
Exactly.
The math is just the raw material. The real power lies with the pen.
Yes.
Whoever actually draws the physical borders of those districts controls the outcome. And yesterday, the Supreme Court completely rewrote the rules for the people holding those pens.
We are talking about the 6-3 ruling in Louisiana v. Callais.
Right.
This decision fundamentally alters a 40-year-old legal framework that governs how political maps are evaluated in the United States.
It's a legal earthquake.
It really is.
Yeah.
To truly grasp the magnitude of this shift, we need to understand the mechanics of the map that actually triggered the lawsuit.
Okay, let's lay out the Louisiana situation. So following the 2020 census, Louisiana drew a congressional map that featured one majority black district.
Right.
A federal court looked at the demographics of the state and ruled that, under the Voting Rights Act, the map effectively diluted the voting power of black residents.
And the court indicated Louisiana needed to draw a second majority black district to comply with the law.
Which they eventually did, right?
They drew a new map featuring a second majority black district, which was known as District 6.
Okay.
But geographically, it was a highly specific shape. It stretched all the way from Shreveport in the northwest corner of the state, cutting diagonally down through the center to gather enough black voters in Baton Rouge and Lafayette to form a majority.
But then a completely different group of plaintiffs sued the state.
Yep.
They looked at that same map and argued it was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. They claimed the state relied entirely on race to draw those borders.
And that is the exact conflict the Supreme Court resolved yesterday.
Right. The conservative majority struck down that new Louisiana map.
They did. But in doing so, Justice Samuel Alito's majority opinion dismantled a precedent known as the Jingles test.
We need to explain this because vote dilution and the Jingles framework are everywhere in these sources.
Yeah.
How exactly does a map dilute a vote?
It's a great question. And it really comes down to two primary map drawing tactics: packing and cracking.
Yeah, cracking.
Right. Imagine a hypothetical city with 100,000 voters where 40% of the population belongs to a specific minority group.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you are drawing 4 equally sized districts of 25,000 people each, that minority group theoretically has the numbers to influence or control at least one, maybe 2 districts.
Right. The math supports their representation.
But if the map drawer uses packing, they will draw lines to cram almost all 40,000 of those minority voters into a single district.
Okay.
That district will win their preferred candidate by a massive, say, 90% margin. But their influence is completely erased in the other 3 districts.
Wow. Okay, and what about cracking?
Cracking is the inverse. They split that 40,000-person community into 4 pieces, putting 10,000 of them into each of the 4 districts.
Ah, I see.
So in every single district, they are a minority, and they never elect a candidate of their choice.
So the voting power is either quarantined into one corner or it's shattered across the whole map.
Exactly.
That makes total sense. Now, how did the Jingles framework regulate those tactics, and what did the court just change?
So since 1986, federal courts have used the Jingles test to evaluate these claims under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
Okay.
For nearly 4 decades, this was an effects-based standard. It meant that if a plaintiff could prove a map had the mathematical effect of diluting minority voting power through packing or cracking, the map was deemed illegal.
Okay, so it didn't matter what the intention was.
Right. It did not matter what was in the map maker's heart.
The results were the only thing that mattered. If the map resulted in disenfranchisement, it had to be redrawn.
Yes, but Justice Alito's opinion radically shifts that burden of proof.
How so?
The court ruled that plaintiffs must now prove intentional discrimination.
Wait, intention?
Yes. According to Alito's opinion, liability under Section 2 only triggers when the evidence supports a strong inference that the state intentionally drew its districts with the specific goal of affording minority voters less opportunity because of their race.
That is a seismic leap in legal strategy.
It really is.
We're moving from, does this map hurt minority voters, to, did you specifically and maliciously intend to hurt minority voters?
Exactly. And the mechanism the court validated to defend these maps is what legal analysts in our sources are calling the partisan shield.
The partisan shield. Break that down for me.
This is the mechanism that really alters the landscape of American elections. A few years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that federal courts have no jurisdiction to police partisan gerrymandering.
Right, I remember that.
They decided that drawing maps to maximize the power of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party is a purely political question, not a constitutional one. Therefore, partisan gerrymandering is entirely legal under federal law.
So using a map to crush the opposing political party is fair play, but using a map to crush a racial group is illegal.
Correct. And under the new Callais ruling, those two concepts merge.
Oh.
A state legislature can now defend a map that severely dilutes minority voting power by arguing the map was drawn purely for partisan advantage.
Because race and politics are so tied together.
Exactly. Because racial identity and political affiliation are deeply intertwined in the United States. For example, black voters in the American South overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. A legislature can simply argue, we did not fracture this black neighborhood in Memphis to dilute black voting power. We fractured it to eliminate a Democratic district and protect a Republican incumbent.
It functions exactly like a massive tax loophole.
That's a good way to put it.
It's like writing off a month-long luxury vacation as a business expense. As long as you can prove you had one legitimate 15-minute business meeting on that trip, or in this case, a pure partisan motive for drawing the map, the courts cannot penalize you for the rest of the outcome.
That is the exact argument.
But wait, how does a plaintiff ever beat that in court? How do you prove intentional racial discrimination if the state can just claim it was bare-knuckle politics?
According to the experts, it borders on impossible.
Wow.
The Seattle Medium featured an interview with Jason Torchinsky, an election lawyer who frequently represents Republicans in these redistricting battles.
And what did he say?
He pointed out that proving intent requires a smoking gun. You essentially need an email, a text message, or an audio recording where a lawmaker explicitly states, I am targeting this specific racial demographic to diminish their power.
And lawmakers just don't do that.
No, they don't.
They aren't sitting in back rooms twirling their mustaches and writing down discriminatory intent on official state letterhead.
Exactly.
Furthermore, they are using incredibly advanced mapping algorithms that run billions of simulations based purely on historical precinct-level voting data.
Right.
They don't even need to look at racial demographic data. The partisan voting data acts as a perfect proxy.
Which brings us to the fierce pushback documented in the sources. The liberal justices on the court, led by Justice Elena Kagan, issued a blistering dissent.
I read that.
And civil rights organizations like the Brennan Center for Justice are framing this as an existential threat to minority representation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Justice Kagan's dissent dives deep into the legislative history of the Voting Rights Act itself.
She really does.
She points out that back in 1982, Congress specifically amended Section 2 of the VRA to codify it as an effects-based test.
Yeah.
They debated this exact issue over 40 years ago and concluded that requiring plaintiffs to prove a lawmaker's racist intent was an impossible hurdle.
Right.
Kagan argues the conservative majority is overtly ignoring the text and the clear historical intent of Congress, allowing states to whitewash the dilution of minority voting strength.
Michael Waldman, the president of the Brennan Center, echoed that sentiment aggressively.
What did he say?
He called the ruling the final blow that leaves the Voting Rights Act as a hollow husk.
A hollow husk.
Yeah. He is demanding that Congress intervene immediately to ban congressional gerrymandering outright, and he even joined calls for imposing term limits on Supreme Court justices.
But let's look at the underlying philosophical divide here, because the conservative justices aren't just making this up in a vacuum.
No, they're not.
They are operating from a fundamentally different interpretation of the Constitution.
They are. This debate exposes the central tension between the 15th Amendment and the Voting Rights Act.
Break that down.
The conservative majority interprets the Constitution's equal protection clauses as demanding absolute race neutrality.
Okay.
They believe that forcing a state legislature to draw a district like Louisiana's district, a district whose bizarre shape was undeniably dictated by a desire to capture a specific racial group, is inherently unconstitutional.
Even if it's meant to help.
Right. To them, the Voting Rights Act cannot be used as a tool to mandate proportional racial representation.
So their view is, the Constitution says we cannot use race to draw lines, period, even if we are trying to help a minority group.
Yes. They argue that if a state relies on traditional, race-neutral criteria like keeping cities together or even protecting political incumbents, the resulting map is legal, regardless of the demographic fallout.
But the liberal minority fundamentally rejects that framework.
They absolutely do.
They argue that ignoring the real-world effects of these maps destroys the promise of an equal political process.
Right.
In their view, the entire purpose of the Voting Rights Act was to mandate a look at the results. If a map structurally prevents a community from ever electing their preferred candidate, the promise of the 15th Amendment is just an illusion.
It is a profound legal stalemate. We have two entirely different definitions of what equality actually means in practice.
We really do. But we need to bring this down from the Supreme Court chambers to the ground level.
Yeah, let's talk about the real world.
We are rapidly approaching the 2026 midterms. What are the immediate practical implications of this ruling for the maps people are actually going to vote on?
The implications are immediate and aggressive. According to tracking by Democracy Docket and reporting in the Seattle Medium, state legislatures are already mobilizing.
Already?
Yes. Let's look back at Louisiana, the epicenter of this ruling. Governor Jeff Landry just announced he is suspending the state's upcoming May 16 primary election.
Wait, suspending an election when military and overseas ballots have already been printed and mailed out?
Yes.
That isn't just unusual, it is actively defiant. It directly challenges the Purcell principle, right?
Exactly.
That's the legal doctrine stating courts and governments should not change election rules at the last minute because it causes mass voter confusion. State legislatures are essentially calling the courts bluff here.
They absolutely are. The Callais ruling flashed a massive green light, and state governments are sprinting through the intersection before anyone can stop them.
Wow.
Governor Landry suspended that primary specifically to give the Republican-controlled legislature time to redraw the congressional map and dismantle that second-majority black district.
And Louisiana isn't operating in isolation. What is happening in Florida?
The timeline in Florida is breathtaking. Just hours after the Supreme Court released the Callais decision, Florida lawmakers rammed through a new congressional map heavily pushed by Governor Ron DeSantis.
Just hours later.
Hours. Because they no longer fear an effects-based Voting Rights Act challenge, this new map aggressively utilizes the partisan shield.
And what's the result?
It is projected to give the Republican Party a dominant 24-4 seat advantage in the state.
24-4, that is overwhelming engineering.
It is.
And I saw in the Democracy Docket piece that Tennessee is making moves too.
Yes. Leading Republican figures in Tennessee are actively urging the state legislature to reconvene.
To redraw the maps again.
Yeah. Their stated goal is to redraw the state's congressional map to eliminate the lone majority-minority district, which is centered around the city of Memphis.
So they're going to crack it.
Exactly. By cracking the Memphis population and distributing those voters across several surrounding deep red rural districts, they can neutralize that voting bloc entirely under the guise of maximizing Republican representation.
So let's tally this up. Between the immediate actions in Louisiana, Florida, and Tennessee, combined with aggressive map redraws that recently survived court challenges in North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas,
Right.
What is the net seat shift looking like for the 2026 cycle?
Well, analysts estimate that Republicans could net up to 18 new House seats in the near term, purely through these mid-decade gerrymanders.
18 seats is a political earthquake.
It's massive.
In a U.S. House of Representatives where the majority control is frequently decided by a margin of just 4 or 5 seats, an 18-seat swing engineered entirely by map makers is functionally insurmountable.
It really is.
But what happens after 2026? When we look ahead to the 2028 cycle, does this escalate?
Oh, it escalates dramatically. One Republican strategist cited in the sources estimated that up to 70 congressional seats across the country could be redrawn by the end of the 2028 cycle.
70 seats.
70. With the effects-based constraints of the Voting Rights Act essentially neutralized, any state government controlled entirely by one political party possesses a massive incentive to draw the most ruthless, aggressive map mathematically possible.
But it is crucial to note that Republicans do not have a monopoly on state house control.
No, they don't.
Democrats govern several heavily populated states. They're not going to just sit on their hands while the map is rewritten around them.
Certainly not. Democratic strategists are openly preparing counteroffensives.
What does that look like?
In states where Democrats hold total legislative control, places like New York, California, and Illinois, you can expect to see aggressive partisan gerrymandering deployed in the opposite direction.
Using the same partisan shield.
Exactly. They will likely utilize the exact same partisan shield to justify maps that spread out their Democratic voters strategically, swallowing up conservative rural areas to neutralize the Republican gains happening in the South.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at a physical phenomenon, which was millions of moving boxes.
Right, the Great Migration.
The great demographic migration from the coasts to the American South and West. We established that the sheer volume of human movement dictates how many congressional seats a state is awarded.
Yeah.
But what our sources clearly reveal today is that demographics are nothing more than the raw materials.
That is the ultimate takeaway here. The math provides the raw materials, but those materials are handed over to partisan state legislatures.
Right.
And thanks to the Supreme Court's shift from an effects test to an intent test,
Right.
those legislatures now wield unprecedented, largely unchecked power to mold those materials.
Because they can just use the shield.
Exactly. As long as they invoke the defense of raw partisanship, they can draw lines that secure their party's power for a decade, completely insulated from the historical constraints of the Voting Rights Act.
It is a masterclass in how administrative rules override raw population data.
It really is.
Which brings us to why this matters so intensely for you, the listener.
Yes, absolutely.
Whether you recently packed up a moving box to relocate to a booming state like Texas, or you decided to stay rooted in a state like New York that is losing representation, the actual functional weight of your individual vote over the next 10 years is not being decided at the ballot box.
No, it's not.
It is currently being decided in committee rooms by political operatives dragging borders across a computer screen.
The mechanism of democracy is basically being adjusted under the hood long before Election Day ever arrives.
It forces us to confront a really uncomfortable reality about how our system operates. We are taught that our political power stems directly from our vote and our physical presence in a community.
Right, that's what we're all taught.
But if demographic shifts merely dictate how many representatives your state is allowed to have, while partisan map drawers possess the unchecked authority to engineer who those representatives will actually be.
Yeah.
Does your political power really come from where you choose to live? Or does it come exclusively from the person holding the pen?
That's the big question.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.